Hello, welcome to my recap, and now I'm doing the round 10 of Candidates 2013, continuing this series of videos, and in this round Carlsen played against Gelfand. The second game, he was white now, and let's see what happened. He began with e4, and Gelfand played c5, knight f3, knight c6, and we had Rossolimo with bishop b5. And Gelfand here plays e6. I think the second most popular move here, I think g6 is amongst the most popular moves here, but he chose a different move, trying to get knight g7 in and to be able to play a6 without compromising the structure. And white doesn't want to capture on c6 just yet. He wants to provoke a6, to wait for a6 and then to take on c6. So he castles first, but now black manages to get in knight g7, and this is why white castles. Now he wants to preserve the bishop pair by rook e1, and in case of a6, which happened, to go bishop f1 back. And one of the ideas that white might have is to go c3 with d4. For example, if black tries knight g6, white can go with c3, and if bishop e7, then d4, let's say takes, d5, and then e5. And you might argue that this one is slightly more pleasant for white because he has more space. I would say this is a slightly more pleasant version of French for white, because the knight on g6 is not really well placed, because it might come under some attack by the bishop on d3, and then f6 becomes less attractive. f6 is usual break move, but in this case, because of doubling on g6, that move can be a bit unattractive. So after bishop f1, to hinder this plan of c3 and d5 and d4, Gelfand plays d5, strikes in the center, and now white has a choice to make. Is he going to capture or not? He can play e5, he can push e5 as well. But e5 just resolves the tension, and black can continue with knight f5, bishop e7, and then castle on the king side, and I don't really think that black has any issues in this case. After d5, white can go also d3. Keep this tension in the center, and now black has an option of d4 maybe, but maybe now e5 is better, because now the knight can jump to e4, to a very nice square. But that's all hypothetical, so let's go back to the game where Magnus took on d5, and after knight d5 we have some structure similar to French after d4. Knight goes back to f6, because c4 and d5 after was a bit unpleasant to meet. So he went back to f6 preemptively, and now Magnus just finishes developing by bishop e3, and he attacks the c5 pawn as well. And probably because of this, black took on d4 immediately, although bishop e7 was also pretty okay, because if you take on c5, then black exchanges and goes knight g4. Challenges the bishop, which defends the pawn, and the bishop really has to step to f4 or d2, let's say to f4, and after bishop c5, I think black is okay. There are also some ideas like bishop g3, h5 with h4 next. For example, if you play rook d2 or some other move, black can play h4, and complications arise. If you take on h4, black takes on h2, and you can check this out on your own. So this e5 was actually not such a big threat. Black could have just gone bishop e7 and then castled. For example, if white tries to somehow get his extra pawn on the queen side to start pushing the queenside pawns by c4, black can castle, and still this e5 is not attractive because queen d1, rook d1, knight g4, and the c5 pawn would be doomed anyway. So you can go here, but when I capture, I think bishop d7 is okay, and then you might exchange, go bishop c6, and maybe have something similar to the game. Also here queen c7 looks good, with the idea of rook d8 next, pinning on the d file. So let's go back here. In the game, Gelfand took, which was not such a big mistake. Not a mistake at all, but I was just mentioning other options. Now Magnus took on d4 and bishop d7 by black, trying to meet knight c6 with bishop c6 and not compromising the pawn structure just yet. And now Magnus tries to gain more space on the queen side, which is his stronger side, because he has 3 against 2 on the queen side. And ideally he would like to push the b pawn, get knight c3, get b5, and create a passed pawn in the end. And black is trying to stop this. And now he takes on d4, bishop d4, and bishop c6. He gets his bishop from the dungeon on c8 to c6, and now his bishop is very happy on that place. And now white continues developing by knight c3, and now bishop e7. Black also finishes developing, and now a3. The point of this move is to prepare b4, and then to squeeze this bishop from c6, to make it more passive by pushing b4, b5, and to ask questions to the bishop on c6. So black here plays a very natural move. He plays a5, trying to stop this b4 move, trying to stop white from expanding on the queen side and eventually making the passed pawn. But a5 has its own drawbacks, because it makes the b5 square weakened, although at this moment it's not such a huge issue, because I think black is happy to take on b5 in case of knight b5, but let's imagine that the bishop exchanges on f3, then the b5 becomes much looser, but that's just going too deep. Now Magnus plays queen d3, and he hints that he maybe wants to go at some point queen g3 and to put some unpleasant pressure on the king side. Black doesn't mind, he castles on the king side, and now rook a d1. Before he goes queen g3 to put some pressure. Queen g3 is an idea, bishop d3, and maybe to put some pressure over here on the king side. Black goes queen c7, and now first bishop e5 before he goes queen g3. Queen b6, and now queen goes to g3. Of course, now the b2 pawn is off limits because of knight e5, this cover attack. And if you take on a3 to defend the bishop, then unluckily the knight on f6 hangs and we have this one, which is a bit unfortunate. So what is there else? Black can go maybe knight h5 to annoy white a little bit and go back. But then bishop d3 might be very good, and after h6 to stop bishop f6, I think because of this h6 which is played, it will be a bit unpleasant for black, I must say. Although he should be fine, but I don't really like these ideas with bishop f4 and exchange, not exchange, but sacrifice on h6. So Gelfand played rook fd8. He didn't want to do anything drastic, and he played just a normal move, just competing for the file. And now Magnus took on d8, using the fact that this is not possible because of bishop c7 and losing the exchange. So queen takes on d8, rook d1, and now queen goes to b6. But this is a mistake. And the best try here was to go queen f8. But still, I think white has a slight edge here. After bishop d3, black can go here, but now b4 is a problem. And black would have a tough time to hold these pawns. Or first bishop c7, and in case of rook a8 to defend the pawn, then bishop c2, just playing it very slowly. And this pressure on the king side is a bit unpleasant for black. But black should hold this one. And the move in the game was queen b6, which is leading to something very unpleasant. Bishop d4 comes, and now the most principled is to go to b3. Now, rook d3. And knight d5 comes next, if you don't do anything with the queen. Also, if you go queen c4, well, there is this issue with rook d8, losing the queen. So, after this, black went for queen c2. Still, the b2 pawn is off limits because of knight d5 and losing the knight on f6. So he went to c2, but now b4. White just expands on the queen side, using the fact that the bishop is stuck defending this knight because of the bishop f6 threat. So b4 is actually off limits. Black takes, and now the knight goes away, but now there is queen e5 attacking the knight on h5 and also targeting g7. So bishop f6, using the fact that also the rook on d3 is overloaded. And now Magnus took, bishop d4, rook d4, and now the knight hangs. But even though the material got reduced, it didn't solve any issues of black. And now Magnus finds a really nice move, using the back rank issue. And that's queen a5. And now the rook is under attack. It has to go to f8. You cannot capture the queen because of rook d8 checkmate. So rook f8 needs to be played. And now queen b6. Black is holding together everything. And he wants to play b5 next, if possible. So black has to play actively, and he plays e5. Tries to make white's position a bit uncomfortable, but white just steps to d1. Now black makes a luft with g6, and like I said, b5 comes next. Bishop e4, trying to keep the b7 pawn alive. And now this move is a small inaccuracy, queen f6 by Magnus. I think that rook d7 is much stronger. And for example, if you go here, to go queen d6. Queen e1 seems a bit annoying because of certain bishop d3 threats, but actually you cannot implement this in the game. And now the c-pawn is gonna run, c5, c6, and it's gonna be tough for black to do anything. Also, e5 pawn hangs, so I don't really see the defense. Maybe queen c3, but you can always make it tougher by rook e7 and targeting e5 with these moves. If you play this, rook e7, and still you put pressure on f6, on e5, and if you go f6, well, you just weaken the king, and you might have to deal with queen d7 in the end. So rook d7 here seemed rook d7 was much more dangerous, but Magnus played queen f6, trying to disconnect the e5 pawn with the pawn chain, with the f pawn. And now Gelfand plays h5, trying to maybe get more space on the king side and also get more space for the king, because queen on f6 makes it so much tougher to get the rook out. And it's a tough spot for black here, because he's in some kind of zugzwang here. If you move the bishop to f5, then rook d5 loses the pawn. And things are not so easy to navigate. Plus the c-pawn is going to run, so it's not very easy. Even if you defend like rook e8, I think that c5 is good enough to claim a win. So Gelfand plays h5 here, and now Magnus answers with h4. I think again rook d7 was a better move, but he plays this, bishop f5, and now rook d5. Now he attacks the e5 pawn, and Gelfand tries to play more actively. He tries to discourage this move because of bishop d3. But here I think bishop e6 first was better. Well, maybe not, because you just lose the pawn like this. And if this happens, c5, you can go bishop d3 next and just enter with the king. So I would not say it's such a good option. Also, once the king goes to e7, you have bishop c4 as an option, and you can make the pawn structure much worse. So No. He went here. Now queen e5. White took a pawn, and now bishop e6. Rook d4, rook a8. Now black tries to get some counterplay with rook a1 and hit the bishop on f1. Now queen e2 by Magnus. White has some issues because of this this activity on the first rank, and it's tough now to push the pawn, the c pawn. And now he goes king h7 first, rook d1, queen c3, queen e4, and now black goes rook a1, which is a fatal mistake, I would say. I think rook a7 just makes it much tougher for white to convert. And things are not so easy now, because you might at first think that b6 will win the b7 pawn, but after rook a2, if you take on b7, we play this, and now it's not easy to push the pawn because of two things. The pawns are not connected yet, and also you have issues with queen c2 coming and grabbing this pawn on f2, plus attacking the rook on d1. So if you try queen c6 to connect the pawns by c5, first you can go bishop g4, trying to ask some questions to the rook on d1. If it leaves the first rank, let's say rook d8, then rook b1 can be a bit dangerous, and the bishop on f1 is alone and things are very complex. If he plays f3, then the king is a bit weakened and you can give a check and then go back. You even have time for this. And actually, white has to be a bit careful here, because if he plays c5, that's losing for white because of rook b4. And now the h4 pawn is under attack, the king is in so much trouble. And if you push g3, well, we go here and queen f2 next, with some nasty, naughty threats. So rook a7 would make things much more complicated, and the game would go on, actually. But Gelfand chose to exchange rooks, and now this exchange didn't really favor black. Now the c-pawn starts marching, and the c-passed pawn is going to be very dangerous. First, Gelfand plays queen c3, and now Magnus takes on b7, which was a bit reckless, because it leaves the bishop quite unsafe. He could have gone b6 and then to take on b7, but he chose a different way. For example, if you take on c5, you take on b7, and now the b pawn is gonna decide. So he took on b7, and now he missed a very nice move by Gelfand, queen e1. Now bishop c4 becomes a very strong threat. Queen e4 is not possible, so things are not getting done very easily. But Magnus plays b7, b6, and he allows actually bishop c4 and losing the bishop. But actually here, queen e7 was just winning on spot. Although black can play queen b1, but after b6, bishop c4, you can push. And actually it's just one check. If bishop d5, then just f3. And the king is just fine here. The king is doing just fine after queen b5. Now there's a very nice move here, c6. And these two pawns are just doing a great job. And if you take with the bishop, well, queen takes, and after this check, promotion comes and white wins. So after queen b6, you can go here, and next move is b8 queen. So this was much simpler than what happened in the game. In the game, b6 happened, like I said. Bishop c4, pinning the bishop, and now black wants to capture on f1 in the next move, but Magnus goes back, and now he wants to just push the b pawn, the c pawn, and then to secure the b8 square by queen g3 or queen f4, and to seal the game. Queen f1 by Gelfand, king h2, and now queen b1. You have to keep these pawns on leash. Now Magnus pushes the pawn, queen b5, c6, and this is game over now, because queen g3 comes next with b8 queen, and black only has time for bishop d5, but doesn't have time to capture the b pawn. He has only time to take on c6, but you can queen, and that's why after queen g3, Gelfand resigned, and actually he lost the second game against Magnus. You can check out the first one in my videos. I think it was a stream, not a video, but you can check it out, how Magnus squeezed the advantage. So that was it. In the next video, I'm going to cover the rest of the tournament, the 4 games which were left, and I'll see you very soon. Take care and bye-bye.